Everyone talks about boundaries. Boundaries. But did you know that there's a chance that what you think are boundaries are actually barriers? So that's what we're going to cover in today's video with 3 signs that your boundaries are actually barriers. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Common Ego community. My name is Christina, and on this channel we talk about emotional abuse, spirituality, self-development, and more. So if that all sounds good, like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you can be notified when I post new videos. Today we're talking once again about boundaries. But today we're not talking so much about what boundaries are, we're talking about more like what they aren't. So let's talk about the difference between a boundary and a barrier. A boundary lets people in a way that's safe and healthy for you. A barrier keeps people out. And it seems really simple, but I'm going to cover 3 ways that your boundaries may actually be barriers. And you may realize that you have some of these barriers that you kind of thought were boundaries. Or maybe you didn't think they were boundaries, but they were still there anyway. You still had barriers up when you didn't realize you even did. I know that I have been guilty of at least one of these barriers in my life. And it's really important to acknowledge our behaviors that could potentially be unhealthy, because you're not going to know until you start putting yourself under the microscope. It's often a hard pill to swallow, but it's super helpful if you want to improve your relationships. Okay, so 3 signs that your boundaries are actually barriers. Number 1, you avoid conflict at all costs. So when you avoid conflict, you're often avoiding uncomfortable conversations, which anybody could understand. But sometimes we need to have uncomfortable conversations. So depending on your level of avoiding conflict, you may have some serious barriers up. So either you'll be the person who lets everybody walk all over you, and that's not a barrier, that is just a complete lack of boundaries. Or you'll be the person who just completely walks away when things get difficult, and that is a barrier. It's difficult to get close to anyone when you completely avoid conflict, because there's going to be some level of conflict in any relationship. There's going to be things that you like and don't like about people. Things that when people start crossing your boundaries, that you have to point it out. And if instead of pointing it out, you cut that person out of your life, it's going to be really difficult to have close and fulfilling relationships. Number 2, the second sign that you have barriers instead of boundaries is that you let your fear of rejection dictate your behavior. So if you are just constantly doing the safe thing in your relationships in your life, you probably have barriers up and not boundaries. A fear of rejection often translates to a fear of being vulnerable. And if you're not vulnerable with anybody in your life, again, you're not going to have those fulfilling relationships that you probably want and maybe need in your life. And number 3, you avoid talking about your feelings. And this kind of goes along with conflict resolution, but it doesn't necessarily have to. So let's say you are in a group of friends and you all get together and your friends just vent to you all the time. And you may talk about some things that aren't really so close to your heart, that don't really upset you that much. But all the deep stuff, you keep it in. You don't share it with your friends at all. You become a sounding board for all of their issues and maybe even give them some advice, but you're never the one to burden anyone else with your problems. And again, this is a barrier because it keeps people from getting close to you. And so those are the 3 signs that you have barriers instead of boundaries. And now I want to talk a little bit about why we might have barriers instead of boundaries. Often, a lot of us in this community have dealt with narcissists or other toxic people. And it is very common and probably even wise to put up barriers when we're healing from those relationships, because we don't know who's safe and who's not. But the goal should be to move from that place of having barriers to move towards having healthy boundaries. And you may even notice that you've had barriers your entire life. I know I told you that I related to one of these, and that one barrier is one that I have had for a very, very long time, long before I was in a relationship with a narcissist. So if you can identify that you do have barriers, it's okay. The first step is identifying it and realizing that there's something that you need to work on. So if you are feeling like you still need to cling to your barriers, it's not necessarily a bad thing for you in the moment. But again, the goal should be to move away from that and move towards having more productive relationships where you can let people in. And if you're really struggling with those barriers instead of boundaries, you may want to talk to someone about it. You may want to talk to a therapist or a coach or counselor or even a good friend about what's going on in your relationships and within yourself, why you're having trouble trusting people. It can be a long road to learning to trust somebody or wanting to even trust somebody again after somebody important to you destroyed your trust. So this video is not meant to shame anyone or call anyone out for having barriers instead of boundaries. It's, again, they can be helpful in certain times. When there are times when we just need to shut down, shut everyone out. There are times when we do not want to be vulnerable, and that's okay. But you may notice that the signs that you have barriers are also signs that you are emotionally unavailable. Not only is that going to be difficult for the people around you, but over time it's going to weigh on you too, because again, you're not going to have those fulfilling relationships. People aren't going to connect with you, and you're not going to be able to connect with people in the way that you would probably want to. So when you're ready, it's time to start working on those barriers, whatever that looks like for you, and however you can do that in a way that makes you feel safe and comfortable. So if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button, and if you'd like to see more like it, subscribe, and I will see you next time.